All right, welcome back, everybody, to the TFR Tech Talk. We have the illustrious Anthony Tony Velasquez back again. What's up, Mr. Energy?
How are you doing, sir?
Doing great. Let me give you a quick bio, and then we'll get right into it. So, Anthony Tony Velasquez leads the Angelus Advisor team, which provides ERP advisory and ERP program and project management services. He's an accomplished senior advisor and thought leader with more than 25 years of success across several industries.
And I didn't shave today, so it's justified with my white hair. So
You can see all that experience.
I can see all that experience on the side of my head and my beard.
All right, let's get right into it. So, one of the main topics I wanted to get to today is that uh, one of the most important things a business has to do is make wise decisions around software selection. So, let me hear some of your thoughts about that topic.
So for software selection, I believe there's several drivers behind the scene, right? So you might have one client scenario that the client already is on a system which is deprecating and that subscription is ending. So they are forced to look for options, to look for new systems, to look for new implementation timelines, forced to do it. There's others that they have legacy systems and they just don't function. The functionality is just not there based on the growth, based on the organization, etc. Either way, I believe at the core, there are strong drivers that force organizations to start looking at other options when it comes to software selection.
Yeah, I see a lot of this in the businesses that I work with as well, where the one of the most important things is to really scope out what do you need and what fits most closely to the need. The thing is, a lot of times, if this is the first time you're doing that, you actually need some help uh, defining those and seeing do they actually match to the systems you're looking at. Because one of the issues of discovery is that if you look into have the sales and marketing material of a lot of these platforms, they're going to tell you they can do everything you need. And if you talk to a salesperson, they have an incentive to tell you that it can do everything you need. Now, is that true? Maybe, but it could be true to an extent. And then in some cases, it may not be true for the things that are the most critical and the most of the highest priority for you. So it does make sense to try and outline with as much specificity as possible, understanding your needs around the system, what its capabilities are, and also what is its strengths. Because even though it can do something, it doesn't mean that it does it the best for your situation.
Yeah, it's definitely an in-depth topic because organizations are made up of people and people are the ones that are going to make this decision, but it's not a decision that's made in a silo depending on who you're dealing with. You might deal with HR and payroll, financial, accounting, depending on IT. All these different teams literally have to come together and look at these options, right? So I believe when around selection is first see where you're at now. So what system are you running? What's the drivers there? It can't be a lift and shift. I know it's obvious, but people do that all the time because it's very easy to do. Just inherit all the problems you have today and put it into a new system. You in a ideal situation, phase zero, kind of pre-planning phase to look at what are the true needs moving forward. Forget about where you are in the system. What do you need moving forward? And then look at your current system, and out of your current system, what needs to come over as far as data. And then evaluate these new software vendors based on functionality and need, as opposed to, oh, I know this software vendor, he's going to give me a good deal. They're going to give me 50% off. They're going to give me a 3-year subscription. They're going to be giving me a 5-year subscription. You really have to look at the functionality of the software and the future state of that within your organization. Then you can go ahead and start negotiating and start looking. Now, most of these organizations, again, made up of people, everybody has a day job, everybody has other objectives. So unfortunately, they don't have the time. Let's not say the expertise, but the time to do the due diligence of doing all this. This is on top of their day job. So they might rush through it. They might just glance over things. They truly, in an ideal state, they should go to an expert firm to look at this and say, can you represent me here and look at this, evaluate contracts, evaluate software, evaluate functionality, and what's the best alternative for us. And if that entity can be agnostic and have no skin in the game as far as who gets the sale, that would be great. Because of what you just said is a key indicator there. Most people go to the software vendor and they trust the software vendor, that the software vendor is going to have their best interest at hand and going to give them the best deal for them. But at the end of the day, they're just trying to sell just like anybody else. And one thing is who sells you the software, another thing is the team that implements the software. So because of those two things, that might not be on that same page. And that is something that I think people who are listening should definitely take into account. They should plan for this. So in an ideal world, you want to start earlier rather than later. What I tell people a lot is, living in Miami, it's easier to prepare for a hurricane before it comes. So if you prepare, 6 months, a year and a half before you have the need, then you can take your due diligence and really have leverage when it comes to information, negotiation, final contracts, final cost, as opposed to try to rush this and do this in a short time frame.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of elements there I wanted to touch on. Number one is when someone is looking for what makes sense for them system wise, having a plan not just for the near future, but also a plan that maps to their company's goals and the direction that they're heading is vitally important, so that they are measuring twice and cutting once when they are doing things, setting things up, uh, getting people ingrained in a way of doing things, setting up data structures and things of this nature. Because as they move forward in time, if you set things up in a way that helps you facilitate your direction, especially if you're a growing company, you're going through growth related issues, setting things up uh, thoughtfully up front will prevent you from accruing more technical debt than you have to, which ends up needing to get paid down the road if it's something that hasn't been thought about with some foresight. So, the other aspect I want to shift into talking about is related to system selection is once you've selected a system, now it's time to implement. And you mentioned there's the people that sell you the systems, and now you have system implementers. There's a lot that goes into selecting your implementer. And when you're looking at software systems, when you read about this in the internet and other people's experience, you hear a lot about implementation failures. So, from your perspective, what are some of the factors that go into implementation failures, and how should clients look at that as a consideration?
It, so you need to know your organization. And let's just say your organization is 100,000, 50,000, 10,000 employees, regardless, right, of different sizes. And then they're made up of different components, right? Different departments, different orgs. That is a big factor because it depends on their expectations. And that's how you define failure or success. So if, I don't know, if there's a team that say it's accounting and financials, and their definition of success is it's going to be implemented on time and it's under budget. That could be one. Now you might have another team, HR, payroll, whoever, IT, that says, well, it's functionality and it's user adoption. And if we have all the functionality that we've identified that we need, and then we actually use it, then that will be a level of success. Maybe others, IT and others, can say, well, it's all on the support. So if I go live and I stabilize and now I have zero tickets, it's stable, I don't have any issues, no red flags, to me it's a success. Well, those, I just said three different things, right? So at the end of the day, you have to be really diligent of defining that criteria, success criteria, at the very beginning. And then with good project and program management, monitor that criteria all throughout the implementation. So when you go live, you already are very clear what is those criterias, and then you can then say, is it a success, is it a failure? Like you said, if you do this quick search, you're going to see a huge percentage of ERP implementations fail. And I think that's too general. It's not specific enough. It's all about the expectations. Of course, you want to implement something on time, on budget. You don't want to burn your resources. That's your employees and the resources that you have associated to the project. You want user adoption. You want training. You want change management. There's several layers that all should come into your main matrix of determining that level of success. And you do that in phase zero. You don't do that in the middle of the project. You don't do that at the end. You do that at the very beginning, just to set the expectation of what it is, right? So I often use an analogy of building a house, right? So if you're building a house and that's the main scope, and living in Florida, if someone later says, well, I want a pool outside, that wasn't part of your main scope. Could I do a pool? Sure, but it's not what was defined as the successful criteria. So if later someone says, oh, it's summertime and we don't have a pool, it's a failure. It was set up as additional scope creep. It wasn't set up as your initial criteria for success. So if you ask that question and you got, yeah, it's a failure because we don't have a pool, it's not accurate enough. So I debate some of those things, some of those articles that you see online, because I don't think it gives you a true picture.
Yeah, that's all really good points. I also think from a implementation failure perspective, to piggyback on one of your ideas, it's aligning your expectation with what your goals are and then mapping to that as you're going through it. One of the other elements that plays into this is if you're implementing a system, especially one that is going to be central to your business, like an ERP, you also want to think about, does it make sense for you to use everything that it offers for all the things that you need? Or does it make sense for you to use some parts of it where it is best suited? And then if you have special needs, that another platform that you may want to use in conjunction with this would be a better solution than overly customizing your base platform and potentially causing a lot of technical debt and a lot of complication, versus finding a tool that is made for your specific use case in your industry and using it in conjunction with your main ERP. So if it's, there's the ability to manage projects in your ERP, but does it make sense for you to manage your projects there? The answer is it depends. How complex is it? How complex is the requirements? How complex is the reporting? What parties need to be in there? What kind of things need to be done within it? Is it something that can be managed with the native functionality of that feature? Or is it something that needs to have a heavy amount of customization just to meet your base process business needs? That's something you want to look at as you're going through your evaluation, so that you can put that on the roadmap, because maybe you don't do both at the same time. Maybe you implement the ERP first and then the project management platform as phase two after you've gotten your ERP stable. So these are the type of things you can think about. And then maybe phase three would be integrating the two together so that it's used in conjunction with each other, so that there's one source of truth without needing any manual data manipulation. So you want to think about things in a order of priority, and then also thinking about it, breaking it into phases and what makes sense to tackle, so that you're not increasing your risk by taking on more scope than necessary to get kind of a minimum viable product up and running for each one of these phases.
And to piggyback on that, so one, let's talk extremes. You want to implement a brand new ERP HRIS system. That system needs to talk to other systems. There is no one implementation that does it all. You try to get as much as possible out of that implementation, but even still, there are going to be integrations to other systems. You need to go in with that premise from day one. Now, if you have one core system and you have several connections to those other systems, what does that imply? What does that mean? Best of breed, etc. Right? Sometimes it is powerful to have as much as you can, in one system, knowing that some modules of that system are are not at the same level of functionality as other outside systems, right? And you got to take that into account. Also, there's contracts, there's costs, there's resources, etc., right, that come into that play. Another thing that I don't think it's talked enough about is, again, at the core, that people make these decisions. And especially within organizations, you don't have just one department or one person making these key decisions. So if you know it's a decision that HR and IT and accounting need to be at the table, then they need to be at the table from day one, and they need to get this alignment from day one. I don't know if it's at the C level, if they assign someone as a senior manager or somewhat, but someone needs to be representing each of these phases day one at the table in pre planning, in phase zero, so you can identify what is truly important to them and factor that in. Now, this is a great talk because we can be honest with each other. People are people. There's politics at play. There's nuances. There's culture. Hey Teddy, I don't want you to be successful. For any idea you come up with, I'm going to say it's a bad idea. Obviously, that's there at the core. I think people have to be honest with each other and say, hey, what do we want to get out of this? If we want our organization to get to maximize this investment, let's put everything off the table and make sure that we focus on what's truly important for the organization as opposed to what I think will be better for me in my growth or my career or what have you. By doing that, then you get very clear. And then sometimes what happens is they bring in people like us, right, Teddy? So they bring in people like us because they know you're going to be truly agnostic. You have no skin in the game. You really don't care if this is going to be highlight IT or HR or payroll or the financials team or what have you. They're looking at the success of the project, not necessarily taking the glory at the end of the implementation. So again, I think implementation fail because you have lack of expectations, fails because you have your own agendas built in there, and that's how you're defining success, as opposed to truly looking at it from an agnostic perspective and say this is best for you during this time period so you can go ahead and implement successfully. And then there's different layers to that, right? Which we quickly mentioned: change management, training, adoption, cost, et cetera, et cetera. You check off all those boxes, you check off this criteria, you monitor the criteria. So when you go live, then you look at it and say, yeah, we reached 8 out of 10 criteria box. It's 80% success, and as opposed to 80% failure.
Yeah, absolutely. That type of alignment is so important. I have one more element that we went through earlier that I wanted to go a little bit deeper on, and it was the idea of looking at your processes as they are, and then determining what of this should we implement in the same way in the new system, and what of it do we need to change our process to fit what the system does as its intended and native functionality. Because as much as possible, if you are implementing a new system, you want to try and accommodate your process so that the system runs as designed as much as possible. It reduces the amount of potential issues, it reduces the amount of potential customizations, it reduces the amount of potential errors that are made when going through the new system implementation plus using it as newly implemented end users. So the ability to see what things do you need in a critical fashion for the new system to do in the way you do it, and then having the finesse of knowing we could do this in a different order, in a different way, and it would make more sense this way because we're looking at things from the perspective of here are our inputs, here are our desired outputs, what do we, and here are our limitations and requirements, but what do we actually need when we strip all of this down into these elements, and how does this transpose into what the new system does well and can do basically out of the box or close to it, because then you get all the efficiencies that come baked into all the modern applications. So I see that there's been project risk around resistance to changing how things are done even when a new system is being implemented, when there's some friction and some pushback from departments who have been doing things a certain way for an extended period of time and maybe haven't done it another way, or maybe they haven't worked into another system, or maybe they're working in a system that's from a previous generation, and now that it's time for change, there's some anxiety around that. So part of addressing this is, like you mentioned, the human element, and the human element is making people feel like they are being heard, they are their considerations are being taken while these things are being designed. But ultimately you want them to have a buy-in from understanding things are going to be different going forward, so that it's a pulling force and everybody rowing in the same direction once that new system has been developed during the testing phase and during the implementation and go live.
Yep. So true. Partly why I got my name is over the years, people would say, Tony, the energy you bring during the implementation as a program manager or project manager or what have you, it really fueled us and really got to us. And there was days I didn't want to get on this call, but I knew you were going to be on the call, and I wanted it to participate. And really, what I tell people there from a human factor is this is an opportunity. It's not something negative. So if you say, well, I was on this old system for 30 years, this is all I know, I'm an expert in this old system. If you go to this new system, I'm not an expert anymore. So because of that, I don't like it. I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to give you my knowledge. I'm not going to really add to the success of the project. I really want this project to fail, on and on and on. Really, I think you do have to flip that around and educate people, at least in the beginning, and say, this is a great opportunity. All the knowledge you have in this previous system, we need it for this new system. And you could be that person that has that same knowledge. Just have to be open to how does it work? Why does it work this way? Figure it out, configure it, test it, etc. And to your point, by doing that, it will limit customizations, changes, etc. in the future. And also it will build that internal team, that core team that really knows the new system. So you're not relying on third parties to live forever, right? You have a core team that can do that. And then you can train within, and then obviously put processes in place that if you have changes in turnover or what have you, you still have a core team that can provide that service. So I totally agree with you. I think it's definitely something that should be raised more at the very beginning of the project. It should be, you don't dive in and just talk about task, and you should definitely take back and take a step back and do the human factor, and really, and it could be anyone within the organization. It doesn't have to be the C level, but I think everybody should be on the same page as far as why is this best for us? Let's all dive in here. Let's give it as much of effort as we can, and really it's going to make our lives easier in the future, not more complicated. And because it makes it easier, let's dive in, put all the requirements that we need, put all the functionality that we need, learn as much as possible, be sponges, because this has enabled us to move much quicker along the process.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Let's actually get to the natural progression from this, because now that we've selected a system, now that we've implemented a system, let's talk about some of the post go live considerations. Because once you've implemented a system, your hypercare period is ending, you're signing off on an SOW. This is really just the beginning, right? So the first phase is getting all of these things in place, and now you're running your process, you're running your business out of the newly implemented system. What are some of the considerations that a client would want to think about during this phase?
Yeah. So in this one, again, using the home analogy, if we say the selecting of the system is selecting the house, right? Shopping around and actually buying it. And implementation is they actually built it. Let's say it's a new home, or you made modifications to it, or what have you. The post go live or the governance is you moving into the house. And if you look at from that perspective, most of the time that we spend around a home is the time that we live in it. It's not looking for the home or purchasing the home. So the time we live in it is huge, right? It's the furniture and the painting and the memories and the rooms and the bathrooms and the maintenance and the cleaning and then all that good stuff. So it is just the beginning of that journey. If you equate it to software, it's the same way. Once you go live and you're stable, you're just starting the journey. Why? Because you're using it day in and day out. I often, when people look at a go live, let's say go live is January 1st, I don't celebrate January 1st because that's just the first day you move into the house. You still haven't found out if you have a leaky faucet. You haven't found out if your roof has a leak. You haven't found out if your neighbor's dog is barking at the end of the, at 3 in the morning. You haven't learned the nuances of the house. Same thing with the software, right? Once you start using it, if it's an HRIS system, once you start paying people on time, once they do major open enrollment and performance reviews and what have you, and they're using the system, people are in the system checking their payroll stubs, checking their your PTO balances, etc. They they see the ease compared to where you were before. Maybe you were on paper before. Maybe you were on spreadsheets before. Maybe the process took you 5 hours. Now it takes you 5 minutes. That's where people start and actually using it, right? And you have to build that framework of governance, right? When there is changes that you want to do in the system, how do you do them? When there's issues in the system or things that you have to get to 911s, how do you do them? If you make the processes too complicated, tickets and forms and wait in line, then after a while they're going to say, this system stinks. It's not giving me what I wanted. What I wanted is to save time. Now it just created more issues, more paperwork, more what have you. So that is a plan that needs to be etched in stone. And Teddy, in my humble opinion, when should you think about governance? And when should you think about post go live? That's a phase zero work. That's not something that you do a week before you go live. You need to do that before you initiate the project because you know your organization, you know what you're going to be doing. So I think it's something that should be built in at the very beginning and then monitored throughout change management, training, adoption, job aids. We can go on and on. And then that way, once you go live, you ensure that the implementation was a success. Now you can ensure that life after the implementation is also a success because you already have everything in place, right? You have a team, you have the structure, you have the processes, and they tweak, right? They're dynamic, but at least you have something in place of how you will do things and how you can support the system.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of key considerations during that phase zero related to post go live are going to be, do you have somebody in house that is already used the system, that is a power user or an administrator? Are you going to be hiring one? If you were going to have somebody in house be the subject matter expert, do you have a mechanism or a resource that will help train them along the way? Are they taking the learning paths from the tool? Do they have somebody on the implementation team that is doing a train the trainer type uh, situation? Are you going to hire somebody after the fact or during the implementation that is a expert you're finding in the market? Are you going to find somebody that can come in on a temporary or contract basis to help get the team trained up, get things where they need to be if there needs to be administrative changes or minor customizations once the go live has happened and some things are found out? Because one of the elements during go live, post go live, is going to be when you go through, in the ERP world, you go through your first month end close and you start determining, hey, well, some of these things work the way that we wanted to during testing. And here's some other things that just to get the books closed, I got to do this manually outside the system and book manual journal entries. And then we can take a look and see what type of things do we need to change in the system so that you're systemizing as much of your process as possible, which is why you went through this whole effort in the first place. This is going to be an iterative process when you go through, a month, a quarter, a full cycle of what your business goes through, a full, fiscal or calendar year. And during this period, you want to have the expertise internally as much as possible. But when you need to reach out for it, finding the right resource and having a plan for having that there during the post go live period is something that, using your hurricane analogy, that's planning for the storm before the storm happens and having all the supplies ready to go versus the storm is here. Where can I go to pick up a generator from Home Depot right now when everybody else is scrambling in the middle of a storm to try and pick one up, right? So it's these type
And
of
how expensive is that generator? Let's say you do find one.
right.
You're paying more because you have no leverage at that point, right? And again, because of everything you just went over, that's why you do that in phase zero. For example, if you decide we want to hire someone, let's take our time and due diligence. You want to do that hire early on so they can be part of the implementation.
Right.
Or, hey, I really want someone who knows this, who've done this multiple times. Well, that's why they come to Teddy and Tony. We can do this and we can onboard whoever they want to onboard. We can train whoever they want to train, and they're part of that process too. So once we leave, they have a team that's self-sufficient and can live on as well. So those are the different nuances that potential buyers have to take into account. And a lot of the system sales and system resources and the vendors that they talk to are not going to talk to them about this holistic plan. They're only going to talk to them about the actual purchase of the software. So again, they keep on saying, well, I went to this software vendor because I trust that they have my best interest. Well, frankly, they have one portion of the total journey. They're only looking at the actual implementation, the software sales and the implementation. They're not looking at everything else that happens around that, as you just described, right? So, some are because they've been burned before, or they have the experience from other implementations, or because they hear a podcast like this, they go ahead and say, hey, that's a good idea. Let's start planning accordingly. And then they can take their due diligence and plan. Some are just 911s. Hey, the contract ends in a month. We didn't realize it ends in a month. We need to select right away and we need to implement right away. Let's just hit the ground running and run. And usually when you do things that are quick in nature, it just like the hurricane analogy, it becomes a little bit more costly at the end.
Great stuff, Tony. We could go on for a long time. So let's make it a series. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let the people know where they can find you.
Sure. So the easiest thing is you can look me up, Tony, Mr. Energy Velasquez, which is my last name, on LinkedIn. So you can look that up. Angelus Advisors, you can go ahead and look that up. That's Angel US. Is the spelling, Angelus Advisors. You can look me up on LinkedIn as well. And then you can look us up in our website as well, which is angelusadvisors.com.
Great stuff. This is Teddy Reyes. You can find me as well on LinkedIn, TFR Solutions on LinkedIn. TFR.solutions is the URL. And from Tony and I here at TFR Tech Talk, thanks for joining us. Thanks, Tony.
Take care. Bye-bye.